The wind howled against the tall glass windows of the penthouse, whistling like a lonely song trapped between skyscrapers. Inside, silence reigned. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, it was hollow, heavy, like something had been missing for far too long. At the heart of that stillness sat Jonathan Wexley, once the city's most celebrated entrepreneur. Now a shadow of the man who had graced magazine covers just 5 years ago. At only 48, Jonathan looked decades older. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, now stared blankly at the flickering flames in the fireplace. The world had slowly faded around him. Friends drifted away when his health failed. Associates stopped calling when he stepped down from his empire. And family, well, there had never really been one. It wasn't cancer or some dramatic diagnosis that had brought Jonathan here. It was a rare degenerative nerve condition, slow, cruel, and quietly merciless. He wasn't dying in a blaze. He was being erased, day by day. He had spent years fighting it. Top doctors, experimental treatments, private clinics overseas. But when he returned to the city 2 months ago, he knew the truth. This was the last chapter. All he wanted now was to be left alone. And yet, something strange stirred in him that Tuesday morning. Maybe it was the silence, maybe the way his hands trembled more than usual when he reached for his coffee, or maybe it was that dream he kept having of a little girl laughing and running barefoot through a sunlit orchard, always just out of reach. He didn't recognize her, maybe she wasn't real, but her laughter echoed louder than anything else in his world. With a sigh, Jonathan reached for his laptop. He hadn't touched it in a week. He typed out a message in a local caregiving forum, seeking live-in companion, no prior experience required, will train, competitive pay, need someone calm, respectful, and willing to be discreet, urgent. He hit post without reading it over. 2 hours later, the reply came. Hi, I just saw your post. My name is Clara. I'm not a nurse, but I've taken care of my grandmother for the last 3 years. I'm kind, a fast learner, and I really need this. Please let me know if I can come by. The message was short, sincere, no attachments, no long resume or requests for references, just a name, a hint of hope, and a quiet plea. He almost ignored it, but he didn't. That afternoon, the elevator opened directly into his penthouse. Clara stepped out cautiously, clutching a cloth bag. She looked around 24, maybe with hair pulled into a messy braid, oversized sweater sleeves that covered her hands, and tired eyes that still tried to smile. Mr. Weck, she asked gently, eyes landing on the man in the chair by the fireplace. You're early? He said without moving. I'm sorry, Clara said quickly. I can wait downstairs, if no. Early is good. Early means reliable. He gestured. To the chair across from him, she sat, folding her hands tightly in her lap. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling quietly between them. You said you took care of your grandmother, he asked finally. Yes, she had dementia, Clara replied. We didn't have money for home care, so I learned. Day by day, I made a lot of mistakes, but she always smiled at me like I did everything right. Jonathan didn't react. He just stared at her. No medical degree? He asked. No, sir. He nodded once. Good. She blinked, confused. I don't want a nurse. I don't want someone trying to fix me or explain the odds. I just want someone who won't talk too much, won't judge, and will help me stay human. Can you do that? Clara nodded slowly. Yes, sir. He turned back to the fire. Then you start now. Just like that. Clara became part of Jonathan's world, but neither of them knew what was truly beginning in that moment. That night, after she had made him tea and quietly cleaned the kitchen, Clara stood on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket. The city lights sparkled like stars had come down to rest on buildings. She didn't belong in this world of luxury and silence, but something told her she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Inside, Jonathan stared at the reflection of her in the glass. He didn't know why, but for the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel so heavy. What he couldn't have imagined was how Clara wasn't just going to keep him company. She was going to uncover a truth buried deep in his past, and she was going to remind him what it meant to live, just exist. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The real story hadn't even begun. The morning light crept slowly across the floorboards, cutting lines through the quiet stillness of the penthouse. Clara had barely slept. The unfamiliar silence of the place wasn't peaceful, it was loaded, like the walls were whispering stories she hadn't been told yet. She tiptoed into the kitchen, careful not to make noise. She didn't know yet what Jonathan's mornings looked like, or if he even had any sort of routine. She found the kettle and filled it, her fingers brushing the cold steel sink. Everything felt expensive, but unloved. The fridge was nearly empty, the pantry scattered with unopened boxes of cereal and a half-used bag of coffee grounds. It was like someone had started life here and then quietly walked out, leaving everything untouched. Behind her, the soft worry of an electric wheelchair broke the silence. She turned to see Jonathan entering the room, dressed in a navy sweater that hung loosely on his frame. He didn't speak, just raised an eyebrow at her like he was waiting to see how she'd handle the moment. Good morning, Clara said, offering a small smile. You're still here, he replied, not as a joke. Not cruel, just surprised. I said I would be. You'd be surprised how many people don't mean what they say. She didn't answer. Instead, She poured hot water into 2 mismatched mugs and handed one to him. They sat in the kitchen in silence, sipping weak coffee as the morning traffic hummed far below. "You don't ask many questions," he noted finally. "Would you rather I did?" she asked carefully. He looked at her for a long moment. "No, but it's strange. People always want to know more. What happened? What I did before? Why I'm in this chair? Why I'm alone? I figure you'll tell me when you're ready," Clara said softly. Jonathan's lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line, but something shifted in his expressions, something like relief. Later that day, Clara found herself wandering through the quiet halls of the penthouse, dusting shelves that hadn't been touched in months. She found books on business strategy, biographies of world leaders, and in one corner tucked behind old art magazines a leather-bound photo album. She paused, fingers hovering just above the cover. She almost opened it, but something held her back. That night, after helping Jonathan to bed, Clara sat on the floor by the fireplace, cross-legged with a notebook in her lap. She didn't have anyone to call. No roommates, no nearby family, just pages and a pen. She wrote down everything she could remember about her first day. Then, without thinking, she wrote, "There's something more to him. I don't know what it is yet, but it's there. I can feel it." Across the hall, Jonathan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't usually feel anything after lights out, just emptiness. But tonight, he was restless. He could still hear her humming in the kitchen earlier, a soft tune, maybe something her mother sang to her once. He didn't know the song, but it stuck with him. It had made the air feel warmer, like someone had opened a window in a locked room. The next few days settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Clara didn't hover, and Jonathan didn't push her away. She read aloud sometimes, cooked simple meals, played old records in the evenings. And little by little, the shadows in the penthouse shifted. Then came Thursday. Clara was cleaning the study when she accidentally knocked over a stack of folders. As she bent to pick them up, a single sheet slid out from between the pages. It wasn't a business file. It was a letter, yellowed, creased, and clearly read many times. It was addressed to Jonathan. "If you ever read this, I hope you've changed." Her heart skipped. She didn't read further, but her curiosity burned. That night, while Jonathan slept, she sat on the balcony again. The letter pulsed in her thoughts. Who had written it? What had Jonathan Denor not done that led to those words? She had told herself not to pry, but something inside her whispered that this wasn't just about helping a man through his final days. There was more here, something important, something unfinished, and she was beginning to wonder, what if she wasn't sent here to help him die? What if she was here to help him face the truth? Down the hall, Jonathan stirred in his sleep, his hands twitching lightly as he dreamed. The orchard girl again, laughing, running, always just out of reach. And for the first time, he whispered her name in his sleep. Lily. Clara didn't hear it, but soon she would. And nothing would be the same after that. Rain tapped gently against the glass. Like a soft warning or a lullaby, it was hard to tell. Clara stood at the kitchen counter, slicing apples for a pie she wasn't even sure Jonathan would eat. He hadn't asked for it, but something in her felt compelled to make it. Maybe because the apartment still smelled sterile, too quiet. Maybe because she wanted to create something warm in a space that had known so much cold. Jonathan rolled into the kitchen unexpectedly, catching her mid-slice. "You bake now?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "I try," she replied without turning. "Sometimes, it helps me think about what." She paused, then smiled slightly. "People, life, things I don't understand yet." He didn't reply immediately, just watched her, then said, almost without meaning to, "There's a picture of someone in the back of the study. You saw it, didn't you?" Clara's hand froze mid-slice. "I saw the corner of an envelope. I didn't read it," she said truthfully. "But yes, I noticed." Jonathan wheeled back a little, like something invisible pushed him. He looked out the window. "She was my daughter." Clara turned slowly. "Was? I don't know where she is anymore." His voice was quiet. "I haven't seen her since she was 6. Clara swallowed. "What happened?" "She left," he said flatly. Then, a beat later, with her mother, they disappeared. "And I was too proud to chase them." Clara didn't know what to say, but her silence was kind. He went on. "I built everything after they left. The business, the penthouse, the name. It all grew out of a hole in me. Something to make the pain quieter, and it worked. Until the noise ran out." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. That evening, Jonathan surprised her. "I want to go outside," he said. "It's been months." The city was cold and wet, but Clara wrapped him in a heavy coat and wheeled him to the private garden terrace he rarely used. The sky was gray, but streaked with soft pink along the edge. Sunset trying its best. Jonathan looked up at it like a man seeing color for the first time. Clara sat beside him on the bench. For a moment, they just listened to the city. "You remind me of her," Jonathan said quietly. "Lily, you have the same stubborn hope in your eyes." Clara smiled a bit sadly. "Wherever she is, I think she probably still wonders about you." Jonathan looked down at his hands. "I don't deserve that." "You don't get to decide what people remember," Clara replied gently. "Only what you do next." That night, something changed. Jonathan wheeled himself into the study after Clara went to bed. He pulled out the leather photo album, one that hadn't been touched in years. He opened it slowly. Pictures of a younger man, a laughing woman, and a small girl with braids and a missing front tooth. He stared at the last photo for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. He didn't call anyone. He just stared at the screen. Clara, meanwhile, couldn't sleep. The letter she hadn't read still echoed in her mind. She got up, crept down the hall, and stood outside the study. The door was cracked just enough to see Jonathan in the chair. The album open, his eyes glassy. She stepped back before he noticed. Her heart felt heavy and restless. Clara didn't come here to change anyone's life. She only came for a job, a place to belong, even briefly. But now it felt like she had been pulled into something deeper, not a job, a reckoning. And for the first time since she arrived, Clara felt afraid. Because whatever Jonathan Wexley had buried in his past, it wasn't just about regret. It was about something undone. If she stayed, she knew she'd be part of finishing it, whether she was ready or not. Asterisk. The phone rang once, then twice, then stopped. Jonathan stared at the screen like it had betrayed him, then set it gently on the desk. He didn't have the courage to finish dialing. Not yet. His fingers hovered over the numbers that only memory could recall, numbers he hadn't used in over a decade, and yet remembered better than his own birthday. Down the hall, Clara pretended to be asleep on the sofa, though her heart beat louder than the ticking wall clock. She wasn't spying, but she wasn't avoiding the truth anymore either. Something had shifted between them, something raw, fragile, and impossibly real. The next morning, Clara brought Jonathan breakfast he didn't ask for. Soft eggs, warm, toast, and cut strawberries. He blinked at the tray. Is this a holiday? No, just Tuesday, she replied, setting the tray down. But I figured you've survived worse days. He smirked. You're bolder than you look. I get that a lot. They ate in silence, the morning sun streaming through the wide windows like someone upstairs had remembered how to be kind. After breakfast, Jonathan wheeled himself into the sunroom, where Clara had moved a few plants to catch the light. She'd repotted a few succulents, trimmed the wilting vines, and watered a sad-looking orchid that now seemed to be standing taller. Do you like gardening? He asked suddenly. I didn't, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. But, lately, watching something grow makes the world feel a little less broken. He didn't respond right away, but the corners of his mouth twitched, like the thought tried to settle somewhere inside him. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, what would you do if you had 3 months left? Clara blinked. That's a hard question. No, it's an urgent one. She sat beside him. I guess I'd want to go somewhere quiet, near trees and water. I'd find my mom's old guitar and learn the songs she used to sing, maybe try to write one of my own. He nodded, eyes scanning the light-soaked room. And you? She asked gently. I'd find the one person I failed the most, he said, and ask them if they ever forgave me. Clara didn't answer. The room felt suddenly full of unspoken words. But she didn't break the moment with noise. Later that afternoon, Clara stepped out to get groceries. When she returned, there was a letter on the kitchen counter, her name on the envelope, in Jonathan's slanted, careful handwriting. She opened it slowly. Heart THUDDING. Clara, you are not just a companion. You are a mirror, a reminder. You walk into rooms, and things grow, flowers, warmth, even regret. I don't know what brought you here, but I know it wasn't random. You have stirred things in me I thought were long dead. Things I buried beneath ambition and silence. If you're reading this, it means I finally made a decision. I'm going to find her, or at least try. And if I fail, at least I won't be failing from a distance anymore. J. Clara folded the letter with trembling hands. She didn't cry. She smiled, even as her eyes brimmed. Because for the first time since she arrived, Jonathan wasn't just existing. He was choosing. The next few days were filled with plans. Not the kind with grand speeches or declarations, but quiet ones, pulling files from the attic, revisiting old photos, contacting a former assistant who still kept in touch with old employees. Jonathan's condition hadn't improved, but something else had. Hoped. One evening, as Clara helped him sort through boxes of stored-away memories, they found a drawn child's scribble of a tall man with a crooked tie and a little girl holding his hand, smiling up at him. She used to call me Dudun instead of Dad, he said, chuckling softly. I didn't have the heart to correct her. Clara touched the faded paper gently. Do you think she remembers that? I don't know, he whispered, but I hope she remembers something good. That night, Clara sat alone in the garden, staring at the sky above the city. And, for the first time, she made a silent promise not just to Jonathan, but to the girl in the drawing. She would help him find her, even if it meant unearthing truths that hurt, even if it meant walking into a past that didn't welcome her. Because what had started as a job had become a mission, and she wasn't ready to give up. Not when something so broken still had the chance to be made whole again. The knock on the door came earlier than expected. Not loud, just firm enough to send a ripple through the quiet of the penthouse. Jonathan froze mid-sentence, his fingers resting on the edge of a photo album they had been combing through all morning. Clara looked up from the floor, where she was piecing together a list of old addresses and names from a tattered notebook he had kept buried in the back of a drawer. He didn't move. Clara rose slowly. Should I get it? Jonathan gave the smallest nod. When she opened the door, a tall man in his 60s stood with a folder tucked under his arm. His expression was tight, but not unfriendly. Clara Carter, he asked. I'm Robert Linwood. I used to manage Mr. Wexley's legal affairs. Years ago, he asked for my help. She stepped aside, heart already thudding. He's in the study. As Robert entered, Jonathan's eyes met his, and for a moment, time folded two men who had built empires together, now reduced to paper and memories. I didn't think you'd actually come, Jonathan said quietly. I didn't think you'd ask, Robert replied, but I heard your voice, and while I didn't want to wonder for the rest of my life what this was about, Clara excused herself politely, but lingered near the hallway, folding towels that didn't need folding, listening not out of curiosity, but because something important was shifting. For the next hour, she heard fragments. She moved to upstate New York, changed her name. You'll need consent if you want to make contact. What if she doesn't want anything to do with me? Then at least she'll know you tried. Later, Robert left without a smile, but with something softer in his expression than when he'd arrived. As he passed Clara, he said, he's lucky to have someone like you around now. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She simply nodded. That night, Jonathan sat by the fireplace, staring into it like it could tell him the ending he feared. Clara brought him tea this time. Chamomile with a hint of honey, and sat beside him without a word. She lives 3 hours away, he said finally. Different last name. Works at a community arts center. Clara felt her breath catch. Are you going to see her? I don't know, he admitted. I thought finding her would feel like closure. But now that I know where she is, it feels worse. Like standing at the edge of a bridge, unsure if the other side even wants you to cross. Then don't think of it as crossing, Clara said gently. Just walk a little. See if the bridge holds. He looked at her, eyes worn, but no longer dim. Why do you say things like that? Like what? Things that sound simple, but hit harder than any book I've read? Clara smiled, looking down at her tea. Maybe because I've had to learn them the hard way. He waited a moment, then asked, what happened to you, Clara? She hadn't expected the question. Not from him, not tonight. I lost my mother. When I was 16, she said softly. She was everything: warmth, music, light. After she died, I spent years pretending I was fine. Took care of my grandmother, took jobs no one else wanted. I didn't have a plan, just wanted to keep moving so I wouldn't fall apart. Jonathan's voice was quieter now. And did it work? Some days, she said, but it never really healed anything. What helped was showing up for someone else. There was a long silence between them, and then Jonathan did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He reached over and gently took Clara's hand. No words, just that one small gesture. Not because he was weak, but because he was finally beginning to trust. The next day, Jonathan asked Clara to help him write a letter to Lily. It wasn't long. It didn't beg for forgiveness or explain every absence. It simply said, I thought I had more time, and then I didn't. But I think about you every day. If you're willing, I'd like to see you, just once, so I can say the things I never said, not to change the past, but to honor what we still have left. Dad. Clara posted the letter herself. And for the first time in weeks, Jonathan slept without the television humming in the background. 3 days passed, no reply. On the 4th day, Jonathan's health took a turn. He collapsed in the hallway. Clara found him struggling to breathe, eyes wide with fear he couldn't admit. She called the private doctor immediately. They stabilized him, but his body was weakening. Still, when he opened his eyes, the first thing he whispered was, did she write back? Clara didn't lie. Not yet, but she might. He nodded, closed his eyes again, and muttered, maybe that's enough. But at WASN single quotes, T, not for Clara. She knew if Lily didn't answer soon, it could be too late. And so, without telling anyone, not even Jonathan, Clara packed a small bag. She took the letter's return address, booked a bus ticket, and set out on a quiet mission of her own. Because she hadn't come all this way to let the final chapter end in silence, she was going to find Lily. And if she had to knock on every door in that town, she would. The rain followed Clara halfway to the small town. Drops slid down the bus windows like silent tears, blurring the landscape into a watercolor of forests and winding roads. She clutched the wrinkled envelope in her hand, the one Jonathan had addressed to his daughter, the one he never got to mail himself. The name written on it, Lily M. Garrett, felt heavier than paper. It carried the weight of decades of silence, regret, and a father's final plea. Clara had no real plan. She had a return address, a town name, and the hope that fate might still have a little kindness left in it. She didn't know what she'd say to Lily, didn't know how she'd react, but she knew this. Jonathan didn't have time for what-ifs anymore. If Lily wanted answers, this was her moment. If she didn't, at least Clara could look Jonathan in the eye and say, I tried. The town was quiet, quaint, wrapped in mist like it was hiding from the rest of the world. The art center wasn't hard to find. An old red brick building with hand-painted window signs and paper cranes hanging in the foyer. Clara stepped inside, her heart racing. A woman stood near the back wall, helping a child pin a watercolor to a cripple. She was in her early 30s, wearing overalls stained with paint and a bandana tied back over her thick curls. Her eyes hazel and wide flashed toward Clara as she walked in. Clara knew in that moment. This was her high. Clara said, her voice shaking. I'm sorry to bother you. Are you Lily Garrett? Yes, she said slowly, cautious. Can I help you? Clara stepped forward and held out the envelope. I'm here because of your father. Lily's face went pale. She took the envelope, turned it in her hands, and stared at the handwriting. I haven't seen that name in 20 years. She whispered. Clara didn't press. She just waited, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Is he? Lily swallowed. Is he alive? Yes, Clara said, but he's not well. He wanted to send this, but he was scared you wouldn't want to hear from him. Lily's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. She read the letter once, then again. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, Clara saw it, the little girl from the drawing, standing on the edge of belief and heartbreak. He wrote this, she asked. He did. Clara nodded. He didn't know if he deserved a reply, but he hoped. Lily sat down slowly on a nearby stool. She didn't cry, not yet, but her voice cracked as she spoke. He left without a word. My mom tried to protect me from it, but I saw it on her face every time I asked about him. I told myself I'd never forgive him, but now? She looked up at Clara. Is it too late? Clara shook her head. No, but you'll have to come now, today. Lily nodded, already reaching for her bag. They were quiet on the drive back to strangers, tethered by someone else's unfinished story. Clara drove the borrowed car steadily, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more than once, checking to see if Lily had changed her mind. But Lily sat straight, letters still in hand, as if reading it over and over would prepare her for what was coming. When they arrived, the penthouse lights were low. The doctor had come and gone. Jonathan lay in his room, a thin blanket over him, eyes closed, chest rising and falling slowly. Clara stepped inside first, gently touching his arm. Jonathan, she whispered, you have a visitor. His eyes opened, cloudy with sleep, but alert enough to catch the figure in the doorway. He blinked. Lily stood frozen, the letter clutched to her chest. Hi, she said softly. I got your note. Jonathan's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes filled, trembling with disbelief. Slowly, he raised one hand. Clara stepped back. Lily crossed the room without hesitation. She took his hand, kneeling beside the bed. You don't have to say anything, she said, voice breaking. You're here? I'm here. Let's start from there. Jonathan tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked breath. Clara stood by the doorway, her own throat tight, watching the moment unfold, an embrace of hands, of silence, of time lost, and love reclaimed in the space of heartbeats. For the next 2 days, Lily stayed. She sang old lullabies, read him stories from his favorite books. They laughed softly at first, then openly. She showed him pictures of her life, the art center, the classes she taught, her cat named Butter. Jonathan listened like every detail was a gift. Clara watched from the quiet spaces, content to let them have what they never had before. On the third morning, Jonathan didn't wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, his hand curled near Lily's, a faint smile still on his lips. The funeral was small, just a few people who'd once mattered, and 2 women who now mattered most. Afterward, Clara walked alone through the garden terrace. Lily found her there, holding a letter with her name on it. He left you something, Lily said, handing it over. Clara unfolded it slowly. Clara, you didn't just help me die with peace. You helped me live again. You brought back the music. In my silence, you found what I had lost, and you gave it back. Thank you for showing up, for being the reason I got to say goodbye properly. The world will never know the role you played, but I will carry it into the next place. With everything I have left, Jonathan. Clara closed her eyes, letting the wind carry the words like seeds into the sky. She didn't come to change a life, but she did. Not by doing something extraordinary, but by doing something rare. She stayed, and in the end, staying was everything.